Death Stranding 2 is finally out, because saving the world from a villainous extinction entity that is wearing too tight a dress was not enough. If you're watching this, it's likely that you've played the first game, tried explaining its plot to a friend, and realized it's a waste of time halfway through. So I go inside of this guy, and inside of this guy there's a baby, and inside that baby there's a cutscene. What? In this video, we'll be taking a look at how this sequel holds up and improves upon the original. I will also be putting a clear spoiler warning before discussing the narrative and overall story, because Jesus fucking Christ and Associates, we absolutely have to. Now, I played the first Death Stranding in preparation for this release, where I praised the uniqueness of the gameplay and the stylistic touches that make its world intrinsically interesting, but I also raised some criticisms about the gameplay and the narrative experience that really made me question Kojima's capability of sustaining that unique design and also his capabilities as a writer. Now, it's unlikely that you've seen that video, since YouTube seems to have just killed its reach. I guess it's because I've used death in the title, but I don't know, honestly trying to understand the algorithm is like trying to understand why some fellow gay men are still into Katy Perry. Like, girl, California Girls was 15 years ago, and I'm pretty sure she never kissed a girl either.
Have you ever kissed a girl?
Oh, well, never.
I'll be bringing up these points where pertinent, and of course, do consider helping out a fruity little gamer by subscribing. Before everything, let's talk tech. The Decima engine got a lot of buzz for this one. You've probably seen clips of the game loading a save file in under a fraction of a second, and I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I don't think this is entirely accurate. What I believe actually happens is that as it boots up, it also loads some data from your save to make the transition as fast and as smooth as possible. I tested it out, and if you load a previous save, it does take longer to fully load. That being said, a 2 to 3 second loading time is still impressive, and the fact that the game preloads your latest save to lessen the waiting time is something that just about every development studio should study. Either way, the game is absolutely gorgeous, and it actively amazed me at just how capable it is to have so much going on the screen, including convincingly rendering faraway environments while somehow consistently running at 60 FPS. I also haven't encountered any bugs, which is genuinely impressive for a game of this scale. This engine single-handedly puts the rest of the industry to shame. Either these devs are gods or the rest of the industry is just winging it, which honestly wouldn't surprise me. This is not to say that there haven't been moments where the engine struggled. It did, but they were so rare and so short that I find no reason to be nitpicky or go through hours of gameplay to find an example. About the game itself, Death Stranding 2 is more of the same, which I know sounds innocuous given its existence as a sequel, but this does include a lot of things I'd consider faults with the original. Now, things start off boots enough. There are loads of quality of life improvements, the most noteworthy of which was certainly the music player feature, which for some reason was absent in the original. That's excellent, you can now deliver to the beat of "Oops, I voted again." Apart from that, you can now customize vehicles with upgrades, which reduces the amount of bloating in the fabrication list, since you no longer have a myriad of vehicles that are the same but slightly different. You can now repair vehicles at any place with a garage, so you don't have to go through the fascinating process of storing it and taking it out again, and there's also a lot more customization this time around. There's even a trophy for customizing your room with a photo you've taken yourself, and you can bet your panini that I made something Kojima would violently enjoy. Mark my words, if Kojima makes it to 2050, he will be scanning the rectum of his actors. I also like the addition of mines and supply lines as gameplay components and world-building set pieces, and the chiral creatures add a lot of character to the playspace, while ranging from adorable to holy shit Kojima said fuck your arachnophobia. At any rate, I praised the original for having a gameplay vision that is clear, cut, concise, and unique. It's not about fighting or stealth or shooting, it's all about the delivery and how you prepare to go through a hostile environment to deliver UPS packages in top condition. That was all well and good until I discovered that the trike is essentially the most overpowered tool in the entire game. Fantastic with steep terrain, eliminating any need for cargo adjustment, and being too fast for any threat to catch up to you, the trike was like the gay icon of transportation, serving looks, speed and utility while breaking the game's difficulty curve in half. Death Stranding 2 looked at all of this and said hold my purse. Or feet, more accurately.
My, what lovely feet.
The terrain this time around feels like it's designed to be a lot friendlier, which to be fair can be said contributes towards the viability of all vehicles, but especially towards the trike. Like, whereas in the first game there would be at the very least some resistance to climbing really steep terrain, especially on the mountain, this time around I've encountered no such resistance. Even worse, the game also introduces a new method of transportation somewhat early on in the form of a coffin board. And girl, category is power creep. Boasting the same advantages the Tricruiser has, with the disadvantage of having to balance yourself on sharp turns and inability to carry cargo in itself, the board also has the insane capability of hovering over water and tar, and being both faster and consuming less battery while doing so. I'm out here gliding past giant BTs like they're Mariah Carey's background dancers. This is what I don't understand about the design of Death Stranding. There's this massive facet that focuses on delivering stuff on foot, with new additions like climbing gloves and others, but also a facet that is about making vehicles viable for deliveries. However, they don't occupy a symbiotic space within the game's design. One overpowers the other completely because vehicles just outclass everything. Do you want to deliver something fast? Use a trike or a hoverboard. Do you have to deliver a lot of stuff? Use a truck. The answer has never been travel on foot. And sure, you might say it depends on your playstyle, but let's be real, if something is wildly overpowered, players will gravitate to it. That's a game design flaw. Another thing I critiqued was that the human enemies and BTs are about as threatening as a fart in a bottle, with neither the fart nor the bottle. Human enemies had problems navigating the terrain and were otherwise laughable as a threat. The BT themselves were also very forgiving by design. Your excess cargo would be dropped immediately, which makes your escape easier, and if you didn't, the game would also give you a second chance by having you either escape or fight a larger BT. A BT that, by the way, was also very bad at navigating the terrain and was by all means quite sluggish. Oh, and I also found it to be kind of a plot hole, the fact that in regular gameplay you can only trigger a void out through those large BTs, but otherwise canonically the regular BTs are also able to do it on their own. In short, it's a bit of a mess. Death Stranding 2 is the same, except now the fart has a Spotify playlist. They are still incredibly unthreatening if you're looking to just pass them by. What I will, however, give the game props for is that at least this time around, the game gives you some orders that encourage combat, and some of the new tools are genuinely quite fun. A genuine highlight, in fact, was a new system that lets you capture large BTs to use them as your own. And what makes this functionality fantastic is how uncompromising it is in the fun department. It lets you capture any large BT, even the genuinely colossal, and then lets you call upon them in battle. This is insanely fucking cool. You can tell Kojima is a big fan of kaiju-style movies like Godzilla, and you can have some crazy stuff happening too, like one of those come men?
You never see it coming.
They can summon their own BT and it becomes like a surprising colossal Pokemon battle. I had a lot of fun with it. Wait, I said Pokemon battle. And also capture. Oh no. Oh no. Now, to be honest, I wasn't too enthusiastic about fighting BTs in the first game. Because it had such a strong thriller setting, giving you the ability to fight them really reduced the cinematic fear factor that it had expertly set up. The sequel very obviously amps that up, and honestly, I think it's smart. You can't really uncross a bridge, so the best thing you can do is give into it, and Death Stranding 2 does exactly that. There is a certain character to the absurdity of fighting rogue ninja mechs and huge squid robots that really brought me back to the good old days of Metal Gear Revengeance. I will, however, say that I still find it, design-wise, strange that the game will still give you a copious amount of weapons and blood packs. In a way, I do understand the necessity of it, because you don't always know if the story will bring you head-to-head with a BT boss fight. But this time around, there are orders you can accept that specifically have you eliminate large BTs, and the game will still give you those resources for free, even though you know what you're signing up for. It's a very strange duality in design that is, again, rather contradictory. You have one facet that is about you being self-sufficient in preparing your tools, while the other ensures that you never run out of those tools in a fight. It's kind of a shame. You're robbed of that feeling of being prepared for a fight because you never really have to prepare. Let's now switch categories to the environment itself, because what initially struck me as rather impressive proceeded to do a reveal into the sadly mediocre. Let me explain. Death Stranding 2 brings us to Mexico and then Australia. This obviously implies a change of scenery, which I think sets these places apart between themselves, but also the play space from the first game. There are also some more diegetic elements within the scenery, like the buildings encased in stone which are striking, and also showcase the effects of the timefall on pre-Stranding architecture. That's great, but the crown jewel of the environment I was convinced would be these brand new meteorological events. The first Death Stranding didn't have much going for itself other than rain and snowfall, and in retrospect, a world ruined by temporal anomalies could afford to do something a bit more interesting. This is where I thought the sequel would excel, because it sets itself up for success early on. The first of such events you'll encounter is a sandstorm, and it's pretty intense. The wind impedes you, thunder strikes around you, you can barely see a thing so you can accidentally speed over a dune and muck your cargo up. It's sort of like going on Drag Race, but the runway is a cliff and the only thing that is lip-syncing is your cargo. Visually, there's lots of eye candy too, like how Sam gets covered in sand, how the sand itself pours off dunes. Really, the only thing that looks kinda bad is that some of the textures of the sandstorm are 2D from a distance, but you can probably see why my expectations went up. The game quickly delivers with another such event, Gatequakes, which, while not that impressive visually, they add to the complexity by forcing you to stop and maintain your balance. Several hours later, you have a dolphin meteor shower, which is a wild sentence to say, especially as in 1 minute you're preparing for a chill animal rescue, only to be dive-bombed by time anomalous flippers with a vengeance in the next. Side note, love the inclusion of animals this time around. The original had animals in cutscenes and nowhere else, but this time around you can rescue random animals, and the shelter also has an online component that showcases the animals other players have saved. Very neat. And finally, the game also hits you with an avalanche. All of these events make it sound like Death Stranding 2 is cooking something special. Like, it's got the sauce, but it's just boiling water and calling it a stew. The sandstorms are the only hazard you can encounter consistently. The other ones, not so much. Gatequakes, as far as I can tell, are largely scripted, they never happen randomly. In fact, they barely happen after the story itself ends, and only to indicate that you're about to be attacked by a large BT. The meteorite rain never happens again, and while the game does indicate that forest fires can randomly occur, I've never seen them. I'd make a joke about Smokey the Bear, but the only time I've seen a forest fire was in a scripted side mission. So it looks like he's doing his fucking job. And avalanches? Never seen them again. And trust me, I would know. I've had to grind so damn hard for these mountain settlers that I think it's impossible for it not to have happened unless it was scripted. This is very disappointing. And I also want to say this on the subject of how grindy some of these settlers are. No game is made better by making it grindier. Yes, it's a complex relationship between content availability, rewards, and pacing, but if I have to go through a settler's full list of orders up to 3 or 4 times, go back to the drawing board. Now, let's move on to the story, because this was one of the things I was most concerned with. This is the bit where the story spoilers will get increasingly major, so watch at your own discretion from here. The original Death Stranding made it very clear that Kojima wanted to produce a highly cinematic and complex narrative, and that he is able to design things that are disgusting and weird, while presenting them in a way that is engaging and interesting. It's hard not to look back at the first trailer of the original and not admit that what's shown here is intensely fascinating, in a really gross way. By the end, however, it became very clear that while Kojima's strengths lay in design, his writing tends to veer off into the overly complex and absurd, and even the overtly nonsensical. I'm not gonna go through everything, but a personal highlight was just how much of a clusterfuck Emily's character was. She was this character that didn't actually exist because she was the soul of Sam's adoptive mother, but it got separated from her body, so it essentially became its own being. She was an extinction entity, which means that she had the duty to start the last extinction that would end humanity, but to do so she needed Sam to fully connect America, all the while she worked with a terrorist group that would try to stop him at every step of the way, and would also conduct various acts of terrorism that only served to make the network even weaker. And in the end, because she wasn't just an extinction entity, but also a human with reasoning capabilities and feelings, she'd flip-flop between wanting to end the world and not ending the world, which just manifested in a cycle where Emily would lie to Sam over and over again. She was hot, she was cold, she was yes, she was no, and oh my god, it turns out Katy Perry was relevant from the start. This is, in my opinion, as messy as the story gets, but by no means the only example. DS2 weirdly follows the original story structure beat by beat, which is one hell of a foreshadowing device. You start in a smaller open world and then move on to the real deal after the first boss fight with a large BT. Higgs attacks you after reaching the first city knot. There are 3 sequences where you enter nightmarish beaches and fight a mysterious combat veteran for no reason, and by the end you have to go all the way back to the start from the final node you connect. It's essentially a copy-paste with added trauma. Now, using the same structure is not inherently a problem, let's make that clear. So let's focus instead on what's going on here, because we can see some of Kojima's hallmarks really early on. So, 11 months have passed, Bridges has withdrawn from the UCA despite being founded by it, and by all means being a governmental institution in the first place, so I don't know how they can withdraw, maybe they meant to say disbanded. Die Hard Man stepped down, allowing APAC to take over, who now handle all delivery systems in an automated manner. But just before that, Fragile warns Sam that he would be hunted down by Bridges because he left them, and also because technically Lou is one of their assets. This is a very odd turn in terms of their behavior, especially considering that Sam connected the entirety of America for them, and frankly, that the organization was created by his own adoptive mother, who was also the president, and leadership was also taken over by Die Hard Man, who very obviously felt indebted to Sam by the end of the first game. It's this new conflict that kinda comes out of nowhere, and I just couldn't really buy it, especially because they left the UCA/got disbanded, so they don't really have a claim. It's like an out-of-place Mission Impossible premise, except that the only thing that is impossible is the premise itself. Related to this, Die Hard Man and Bridges stepped down to let APAC take over, so that they in turn hire Fragile's new delivery outfit, Drawbridge, to expand the chiral network outside the UCA. And the reason they go through all of this is because they want to expand the network through a private organization so that it doesn't look like the UCA is expanding its territory. There's also another reason, but we'll get into that later. Trust me, that one is a doozy. Now, I don't know about you, but if humanity's on the brink, I don't think I'd give a shit about which used to be a country brings a life-saving solution. Realistically, my question would be, are you good people, and if yes, put it in. The Cupid, I mean, not the... Unless there's this ill-fitting layer of political intrigue that is very Kojima. It's been obvious since his days of making Metal Gear Solid that he likes telling that sort of story. But even if you ask staunch fans of MGS about its story, they do often admit that it's very messy, or at worst has glaring plot holes. And I do want to make it clear that I have only played MGS 5, so it's not fully an opinion I have formed myself, but when even your biggest supporters acknowledge flaws in your narrative, you might have a bit of a problem in that respect. I mean, chief among these writing issues in this area is that trope where you get cued into a conversation and the characters don't talk organically because they have to transmit information to the viewer that they otherwise already know. Oh, I don't want to do this anymore. No, but you have to, cause we can blackmail you, and we already have blackmailed you. Oh shucks, I guess you're right. Another problem I had with Sam in the original is that he felt a lot like a silent protagonist, and that's not because he's meant to be a silent protagonist. Rather, Sam is introduced as this character who doesn't really care. That's for the most part his personality. But the thing is that outside of cutscenes he was completely silent, so this led to copious awkward moments where characters would spew exposition at him while he doesn't care. I called this a failure in creating interactions between Sam and the characters because the transfer of information in a game needs to go from person A to person B, i.e. the protagonist, to you. But you can't have them just say whatever. They can't just be like, hey, remember this person is your sister, because unless heavy memory loss is involved, it doesn't make sense to remind someone of that. They'd obviously know. You have to be smart about how you convey this information, because it has to come across to you through an interaction that feels natural, which is what the first game was painfully bad at doing. This time around, it is better, but the way it achieves that is rather cheap. You're now able to select some dialogue options for the sake of exposition. These options don't include any voice acting from Norman and sometimes lead to very silly situations. Like at the start where you're given the opportunity to accept or deny Fragile's request to connect Mexico, you can just say no over and over again until the game just gives up and forces you to accept. So we essentially hop from one failure to another. It's a fundamental mistake when making choice-based systems, creating options that do not matter or are not supported by the experience at all. At any rate, apart from that, it's kinda ridiculous how the game reintroduces a lot of stuff you've already known from the original, but it's presented as if you've never used them. Granted, I get that you could skip the first game and play the sequel directly, so in that case you'd need an introduction to these things, but it could have been done in a way that is a lot more natural. We also have loads of celebrity appearances and cameos again. And look, I get using actors for most of this, it does make sense. You get a 2-in-1 deal of voice acting and motion capturing, even though it's most likely really expensive. As in, really expensive. I don't even want to imagine half of the production cost of this game. Part of me doesn't think the game is worth the €80 price tag, but at the same time I kind of understand it, because how in the hell would you break even? But one thing that I've said about the original is that when you have a lot of cameos, you put your game in a risky situation, because they do take away from the tone work and setting that the game creates. Little did I know that I had it easy back then. Death Stranding 2 feels even more surreal with all its guest appearances. Picture this. You have a group of pregnant women all affected by a strange anomaly that freezes their fetus in time so they can't give birth. They regularly have to protect themselves from armed raiders while sensibly navigating their predicament. And about 2 kilometers away there's a VTuber just chilling. This is not to say that I personally have something against this VTuber or many of the other cameos that make an appearance. I genuinely don't, I'm not even familiar with them. But they juxtapose so unconvincingly with the sober realism of the world itself. It was also kind of funny seeing Kate Siegel here because her model really puts a lot of focus on her lip filler. Just because the world is ending doesn't mean I can't be beautiful.
Sister, I'm pickled.
Let's now move on to the more pressing matters of the story itself. The big mystery the game posits this time around is who exactly is Lou, and I identify with that because I too am very skeptical of children. Fairly early on, we learn that Lou may not simply be a random bridge baby, and in the course of the narrative Kojima pulls some crazy plot twists out of thin air. So the retconned story is that Lucy, Sam's wife, was indeed pregnant, but it turns out that she was cheating with another man, Nirvana. He's the guy you fight for no reason, much like you did with Cliff in the first game. And I will say, he's actually hot.
The way I would him,
Really?
it's not even funny.
At this point, you'd think that this raises some conflict within Sam, because we never knew him being aware of his wife's affair or the possibility that this child was not his. But then, out of nowhere, it turns out that he knew from the start. He knew there was another man and that the child wasn't his, and yet still carried the picture they took as if Sam still had a lot of attachment to her. This is why I specifically say that this strikes me as a retcon. The pieces of the puzzle don't connect here. At no point was there a hint of this in the first game, much less that he was comfortable sitting in a proverbial cuck chair. Now, the real story of what happened is that Bridges at the time used sacrificial BBs to create the chiral network, which was incredibly difficult because it's not like still mothers were a dime a dozen. This is actually consistent. If you recall, the last order in the first game had you deliver a BB pod to connect to the final knot. Anyway, this is where Neil comes in. He was a smuggler contracted by Bridges to bring in still mothers from Mexico. Eventually, this took a toll on his mental health and he was put in touch with Lucy, who was a psychologist. This is where it's revealed that they actually already met when they were children in a city that was attacked by giant BTs. What's implied here is that they met when the stranding first occurred decades ago, and this brings the timeline into question. If you remember, Sam was originally meant to be a BB, which means that he was born well after the stranding first occurred. But Neil and Lucy, judging by their appearance, were born a good couple of years before it. Either from a temporal perspective this doesn't make any sense, or there may have been a large gap in age between Sam and Lucy. So anyway, Neil and Lucy start their affair, but sometime later Lucy reconciles with Sam and gets pregnant, at which point she wants to cut Neil off. Oh, how the cuck chair turns or something. But Lucy realizes something horrifying. Her baby will be the child of a repatriate, which means that Bridges would find value in her baby to use as a sacrificial BB. Doubly so because this child may take on the properties of a repatriate, in which case they wouldn't have to sacrifice multiple BBs. This makes sense, right? Well, how should I put this? No. First of all, Bridget/Amelie is the one who controls Bridges. It strikes me as very out of character that she would do something so cruel towards her own adoptive son. And second, and perhaps most pertinently, she knows how repatriates are made. It's heavily implied at the end of the first game that she made Lou a repatriate, which means that she's the one who grants this ability. Sam is the only other repatriate we know, and we also know that Amelie gave him this ability, and he would also visit her whenever he would die. This not only means that she knew Sam and Lucy's baby wouldn't be a repatriate, but also that she could make literally any other BB a repatriate for her purposes. This doesn't make any sense, and I really doubt that this would be possible through this guy being a rogue Bridges personnel, especially with Amelie herself being an extinction entity with immense power and some extent of omnipresence. At any rate, this all comes to pass with Lucy and Neil being shot dead, her baby extracted, which… wait, hang on, doesn't a BB need to be attached to a live still mother? Like, the entire point of them is that they can see BTs because they're connected to a still mother who is partially on the other side. I mean, even if Lucy was in a coma, her body was destroyed when Neil was planted in the morgue for his BT to cause a void out and destroy all the evidence. I am really sorry that I'm getting so distracted by all of these things, but it's just so difficult mentally to navigate all of these weird details and plot holes and try to make sense of what's going on. This has been one of the hardest scripts for me to write down, because my mind just constantly goes in different directions. So anyway, hours later it's confirmed that the child Lucy was carrying was Sam's, and that also Lou, Sam's BB, is that child, his own biological daughter. Now, if you're scratching your head at this, well…
Bitch, me too! The fuck?
Bear in mind, Lou was born around 10 years ago and somehow ceased any sort of growth. Like, a very troublesome thing, specific to the story of the first game, is that BBs can be used in perpetuity. They will eventually grow to a point where their pod can't sustain them and they will die. This, as far as I know, is not explained anywhere short of shoving Lou in a freezer for about 9 years or so. But also, Bridges never used Lou despite her being in their possession. They leveled a city of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people for absolutely nothing? Did Amelie remember how all this shit works and pulled Lou herself? Who changed Lou's delimitation from BB0 to BB28? How did it get into Igor's possession back at the very start? Was it a chance encounter? Was it planned? Fuck knows. Now, Lou appears to pass away relatively early on after Higgs somehow returns from the beach and attacks Sam's hideout. Now, what I will say is that Sam's grief, considering that he is somehow less expressive than Gordon Freeman, is shown quite well. He does the persona thing in a twisted wish to end his life, but being a repatriate turns out to be both a blessing and a curse, as he cannot pass into the next life. However, after Sam accepts Fragile's request to connect Australia, Lou's soul materializes inside the pod and seemingly makes it functional. And the thing is that given the lax rules of this world, this does seem genuinely feasible. that Lu is alive, not physically but as a soul, and that she is in some capacity inside the pod. But all of this builds towards the twist that Lu was actually never there, and Sam sort of hallucinated the entire thing. It was in fact Dollman who was operating the scanner all along, and was apparently intended to act as Sam's therapist to help him process his grief, which I don't feel like he ever really did. At most, he'd tell me to take a shower like I'm Asmongold or something. At no point is any of this well communicated or hinted. In fact, Deborah Wilson's character even inspects the pod with her special ability and notices that Lu passed, but talks as if she's still in the pod. This is what makes the story of this game so hard to navigate. Beyond just the general messiness of the plot, the world never feels like it has some well-established metaphysical rules between how the beach and the body and the soul work. It's this strange no man's land where anything can happen at the whim of a writer who is simply obsessed with fabricating plot twists out of thin air. I mean, going further, it's revealed that Lu didn't die. Instead, Higgs shot Fragile, and before she died, her body and soul separated. Her body died, but her soul was able to take Lu, this physical being, and bring her to a beach where she would grow up into a young woman in the span of about a month. Now sure, time passes differently on Earth than on the beach, we know that, but let's not ignore that somehow Lu was able to grow in this paradoxical hellscape of a purgatory. What? And if that's not enough, let me remind you, Fragile was dead this entire time. Despite her being present in soul form, at no point does it look like she's not there physically. She interacts with objects, she's able to touch people, and I just feel the need to ask at this point, what exactly is even the difference between body and soul, or Ka and Ha as the game puts it? Can the soul fulfill the same functions as the body? Do they interact all the same? By all means, Fragile should become a BT like literally everyone else, but she doesn't. I'm genuinely losing my shit over trying to comprehend the writing here. This is awful, I'm sorry, but it really is. Trying to make sense of this is a genuine exercise into the absurd. Let's now move on to APAC, because unfortunately we are far from done. So, as I said before, APAC took over from Bridges by creating a fully automated delivery network and installing its own president in the UCA. They are for the most part absent until the narrative decides to tackle how Higgs has returned and how he's able to create ghost mechs as well as diverse weaponry. Contacting Sam privately, the president suggests that someone on the inside has allowed Higgs to return, and wouldn't you know it, it's actually them. Yes, yet again we have another example of someone collaborating with the main antagonist to work against their own interest. They want Sam to connect Australia to the chiral network, but at the same time allow Higgs to make the world more dangerous, hinder him, damn near enabling him to torture Sam. The justification, is that if they make the world more dangerous, they encourage the surviving population to live in shelters, which I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but they already fucking do. But they actually go a step further, believing that through their delivery systems and the dangers of the outside world, they could make people so averse to meeting that they could make the human species extinct. Let that sink in. They want to get people addicted to Amazon deliveries so hard that they stop having sex. I can't speak for all of you straights out there. I'm gay. I can't get pregnant even though I tried. But would you stop wanting to have a family just because you have free Amazon deliveries? Actually, you know what? Don't answer that. I'm starting to believe it myself. But even if you make this inoculated bubble that protects people from the outside world, people still live in populated cities. It doesn't stop the human race from continuing, unless you would kill them all, which they say they don't want to do. So, anyway, APAC is revealed to be an amalgamation of about 4,000 people and a delivery system that was converged after a massive void out in the UCA. And I'm gonna say this, as a piece of existential horror, it's fantastic. All of these souls combined, this loss of individuality, even in an afterlife realm beyond our understanding, is absolutely horrific. And the imagery within this scenery embodies that so well. All of these souls intertwined in the sky, these massive gravestone-like structures that change appearances, revealing hints of individuality quashed up by this horrible predicament. Genuinely well done, Kojima. How are you gonna follow this up? Why, with a dance number, of course.
I will hold you and protect you. So
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
I'm gay, but I'm not that gay. watching? What are we watching?
Cringe. That's what I've done during this entire sequence. In fact, I don't think I've cringed so much for a long time while playing a game. I just couldn't stop asking myself, why? What is this supposed to mean? What purpose does it have? The thing about combining the soberly serious with humor is that it's a thing of pertinence.
Well, I woke up next to a waterfall and...
We can talk later.
There's a time and place for fun, and I can tell you that right after a reveal where thousands of people suffer from a terrible existential predicament is not one of them. The same thing happens at the end when Sam and Higgs jam it out in a rock battle, as if they're not just fighting for the fate of the human race. I don't doubt that Kojima's mind is fascinating, fun, and everything in between, but girl, I can say that this vision translates to an experience that requires a certain degree of consistency and solemnity. Also, it's funny how the only person you can tell Charlie to impersonate is Die Hard Man, and then it's revealed that he was Die Hard Man. Really big brain moment there, Kojima. And this is where I think we can leave Death Stranding 2. In the end, I'm left with the same opinion I had at the end of the original. Kojima is fantastic at coming up with gameplay experiences that are unique, and it's something that I genuinely appreciate about him. Yoko Taro is right when he says that there aren't enough weird people making games. We don't have enough studios and publishers willing to do something different, and Kojima is most certainly to be appreciated for that. However, I don't think that excuses the aspects in which Kojima is lacking. His unique gameplay can fall short, the Tricruiser still being insanely powerful in the sequel, arguably even more so with the map's design, in helping you ignore so many gameplay design intricacies is proof of that. And when it comes to the narrative experience, it's undeniable that Kojima can design things and places and monsters that are intrinsically interesting visually. He's fantastic at setting up captivating and weird premises, but I do think that these elements are better handled by someone with better writing capabilities that can respect a certain degree of thematical and tonal consistency, as well as having the capability to ask themselves whether in the end everything makes sense. To conclude, I do want to clarify that I do not think that Death Stranding 2 is a bad game, but I certainly do not think that it's peak either. It's a good game. It's fine as an experience, even though it didn't necessarily satisfy me. Again, I recognize that I have a tendency to sound overly negative in my criticism, but I do so because I care and because better is possible. Death Stranding, in many ways, strikes me as the sort of series that has a certain degree of childlike wonder to itself, like a dream come true of working with actors and celebrities and being able to tell a story that you want with them.
Bye, Sam.
Bye, Yukio.
I identify with that, but it needs more finesse in its gameplay and narrative to become an elevated experience. And that's all I have to say for this video. Thank you for watching, especially if you reached the end, it really helps. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing because that helps a lot too, and as always, have a good one.